So how did America go from this quiet nation of farmers to a global industrial powerhouse? Well, it wasn't just about politics or war. A huge part of the story comes down to two things: iron and soil. Today, we're going to dig into four surprisingly simple machines that completely rebuilt the American landscape and, in the process, totally reshaped the nation's destiny.
You know, at the start of the 19th century, this was the American dream. And Thomas Jefferson, well, he said it best. The vision was a nation of small, independent farmers. People who were virtuous because they were tied to the land, feeding their families with the work of their own two hands.
Yeah, but there was one tiny problem with that beautiful vision. It slammed right into the hard reality of the American continent. I mean, this was a vast, rugged wilderness that fought you every step of the way. Break-in axes and old wooden plows.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by looking at the trap created by the Cotton Kingdom. Then we'll move on to the plow that literally broke the plains, the machine that harvested a whole new economy, and finally, the wire that tamed the West. It's really the story of an unintended revolution.
So, our story starts in the American South, where this one super simple but incredibly frustrating problem was just grinding the whole region's economy to a halt.
So here's the deal. There was this type of cotton, short staple cotton, that grew really well, but its seeds were a nightmare, just incredibly sticky and tangled in the fibers. Working by hand, one person could clean maybe 1 single pound of cotton in a full day of back-breaking work. So how do you build an economy on that, right? There's just no way.
And the answer came in 1793 from a guy named Eli Whitney. His invention, the cotton gin, was basically a clever mechanical comb that yanked the cotton fibers through a mesh screen, leaving all those sticky seeds behind. Just look at these numbers. It's a huge leap in productivity. One person went from cleaning 1 pound a day to 50 pounds a day. That's a 50x increase, absolutely staggering.
But, and this is a really big but, there was a dark side to all this incredible efficiency. See, this wasn't just simple progress. It turned into a kind of economic trap. Cotton suddenly became so profitable that instead of needing less labor, the gin created this bottomless demand for more land and more enslaved people to plant and pick it. This is what really created the Cotton Kingdom, and tragically set the country on a collision course.
All right, let's switch gears and head west, where pioneers were hitting a completely different but just as stubborn wall.
So settlers get out to the Midwest, and they find millions of acres of this incredible, rich prairie land. But the soil was a nightmare. It was so thick and heavy and sticky, it would just glom onto their old iron plows like glue. They'd have to stop every few feet to scrape it off. A lot of people just threw up their hands and gave up, calling the whole area the Great American Desert.
Then, in 1837, this blacksmith, a guy you've probably heard of, John Deere, has a brilliant idea. He figured out that a really polished steel surface could actually clean itself as it moved through the dirt. So he grabs a broken saw blade, shapes it into a plow, and it worked. It sliced through that tough prairie sod like a hot knife through butter. No more sticking. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just a slightly better plow. This was literally the key that unlocked the entire Midwest. It took what everyone thought was a wasteland and turned it into the breadbasket of the world, which, of course, just fueled that whole westward push of manifest destiny. You know, it's pretty amazing when you pause and look at how fast this all went down. We're talking less than 100 years for these 4 key inventions to show up, and each one just hit the accelerator on the nation's transformation. Okay, so farmers can now plow the plains. Fantastic. But guess what? That just created a brand new problem. Now they were in a race against an enemy you can't see: time itself. They called it the ticking clock of the harvest. Grain has this tiny window when it's perfectly ripe. If you wait just a little too long, your entire year's work just rots in the field. And before the 1830s, harvesting meant all this backbreaking work with a scythe, which meant you could only plant as much as you knew you could physically cut in time. And then, in 1831, along comes Cyrus McCormick with his mechanical reaper. It was a machine pulled by horses with this vibrating blade that just cut down the grain as it moved. And just look at the difference this thing made. What used to take a whole team of people a full, exhausting week could now be done by one person in just one afternoon. It's just wild. So this machine, it did way more than just cut wheat. It kicked off this huge chain reaction. All of a sudden, you have these massive grain surpluses. That grain fed the new, booming industrial cities up north. And since you didn't need as many people working on the farm anymore, a whole generation of workers was freed up to move to those cities and get jobs in the factories.
It literally fueled the whole urban American economy.
All right, for our last one, let's look at a surprisingly simple invention that basically brought law and order to the wild, chaotic frontier after the Civil War. Out on the Great Plains, there were hardly any trees, so the problem was simple. How in the world do you build a fence to protect your crops from huge roaming cattle herds? The answer, which Joseph Glidden started mass-producing in 1874, was barbed wire. And I love this old quote about it. Cheap as dirt and stronger than whiskey. Sums it up perfectly. And it's kind of crazy to think about, but this one simple thing, a strand of wire with some spikes on it, it ended a whole way of life. It was the end of the open range, the end of the great cattle drives. It finally let farmers protect their crops, sure, but it also completely upended the nomadic lifestyle of Native American tribes by cutting across their lands. It just drew lines all over the map, carving up this vast wilderness into little squares of private property. All right, so let's zoom out and pull all these pieces together. Let's look at the huge picture that these 4 inventions painted for America.
When you lay it all out like this, you start to see a really clear pattern, right? Every single one of these inventions was designed to solve a very real, physical problem. Getting seeds out, breaking tough sod, beating the clock, building a fence. But its real legacy, the thing that changed the world, was always social, economic, and even political.
So when you get right down to it, these machines weren't just about helping farmers. They were about completely re-engineering a nation. They took that original Jeffersonian dream of a quiet farm nation and just steered the country in a totally new direction, forging this modern industrial powerhouse. But it was also a nation that was more divided than ever over the very land and labor that these machines had transformed. And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question, one that feels just as important today as it did back then. Technology is great at solving the problems it's designed for, but what we always have to ask is, what new, unintended problems does it create along the way?